Weilà raga, come state ragazzi? Spero tutto bene. How's everybody doing? Benvenuti in questo nuovo video. Welcome to this new video. Oggi sono stato ispirato da un evento che è successo di recente. Un evento che è successo di recente. So, an event that happened recently. Or un evento che si è svolto, right? Yeah, you could say that too. Un evento che si è svolto. Actually, I don't really like how that sounds. Svolgere is to take place, so I'm trying to say like an event that took place. Qualcosa che si è svolta. Yeah, but anyway, sono stato ispirato da un evento recente. That's even better. I'm inspired by a recent event. There we go. So sono stato ispirato da un evento recente. I was inspired by a recent event. La Festa di San Giuseppe, the feast of Saint Joseph, or Saint Joseph's feast day. On the feast of Saint Joseph, it is common to eat the zeppole di San Giuseppe. You can look these up online. They're delicious pastries. Highly suggest you eat them. The two main kinds you'll find are one filled with cannoli cream and one filled with custard. I am team custard, but do as you wish, all right? Whichever one you like. I'm team custard, which is the yellow one. The yellow cream, if you will, or yellow filling. It's amazing. So anyway, I was really inspired because in recent years, so long as I've been paying attention, La Festa di San Giuseppe has become più sentita anche in America. What is sentita, right? Coming from the verb sentire, we're talking about something that is more widely felt, more widely experienced. So this feast day exists, and maybe non era così sentita. It wasn't very heard of or very felt among the people, but now there is a stronger feeling towards it, sort of used in that way. So la festa è più sentita. Possiamo anche dire più diffusa. We can also say more widespread, più diffusa. You'll see it present, more widespread in places. So I recall, mi ricordo, I remember. I recall in my early days of learning Italian, stuff like this would come up. Whenever there is a particular feast day or holiday in Italy, my Italian friends, family, pen pals, whoever, would always say to me, Tom, sai che oggi c'è la festa di San Giuseppe. Si mangiano le zeppole di San Giuseppe. You eat the zeppoles of San Giuseppe. And I remember as a small child, I don't believe I was really cued into that. So when they would share with me that there was this dessert available, I personally don't remember going to a bakery, pastry shop to pick them up. But I do remember as I got older, probably once I was in my 20s, I do recall starting to see them at pastry shops. So this is purely anecdotal. I'm more than happy to hear from you guys out there if you're more familiar with what it was like prior to just a couple years ago. But I remember in my 20s, it started to become a thing. And pastry shops would start to say, hey, today we have this special kind of pastry, this zeppole di San Giuseppe, St. Joseph's pastry or St. Joseph's zeppole. And I remember there being a little bit more education going on. C'era un po' di più spiegazione. Spiegavano di più. They would explain more. Spiegavano di più. Always remember, con l'imperfetto, the imperfect, which I've got a bunch of videos on. I'll have some linked down below. We use would also in English to talk about something in the past at a non-specific time, or a habitual thing. They would explain what they were. They used to explain what they were. They explained what they were. These are three ways of using the imperfetto in English. So I noticed there was more explaining going on. They would explain what these pastries were, and it was kind of a newer thing for people. There even became a time where some places started offering the zeppole di San Giuseppe sempre. They started offering them all the time because they were such a success. People wanted them all year long. And whenever I would share that, quando lo condividevo con I miei amici italiani, so in the past when I would share this through our cultural exchange, just by being friends, sharing, oh yeah, well, qui negli Stati Uniti è successo questo. here in the US, this happened. È successo questo. This is what happened. And I would go on to explain it. Using the imperfect there, okay? I would go on to explain it. Io poi spiegavo, or andavo a spiegare. I don't really like that. Spiegavo is better, okay? And I would explain, and they would always say, ma si vede che stai in America. You can tell that you're in America. Or solo in America. Si farebbe così. Only in America one would do like this, because sort of this understanding that some Italians have of the US is that we are a consumer culture. Siamo consumisti. We are consumers, big consuming people. A big consuming people, there we go. And so they would find that funny and be like, that would make sense in America. And then the American mentality is, well, if someone is willing to pay for it, I'm willing to provide it. It's a very American way of thinking. Whereas perhaps in Italy, obviously we can't paint with broad strokes, but for just simplicity of making a point, in Italy the idea would be you eat the zeppole on the Festa di San Giuseppe, and that's when they are available. Like, why should we make them available year-round? Then they're no longer special. Then they lose their valore, their value. They lose their significato, their meaning. So two different scuole di pensiero, two different schools of thought, scuole di pensiero, or two different mentalità, two different mentalities. Remember, whenever a word ends with an accented vowel, you don't change it when it's plural. La mentalità, le mentalità. Just like the word città, la città, le città. L'università, le università. All right? La personalità, le personalità. We could go on. Possiamo continuare. We could go on. Potremmo continuare, you can also say. So, I remember that being a thing, and that's sort of when it started catching on. But I was particularly sbalordito. Sbalordito is when you're just kind of really stunned. You're just sort of like bocca aperta, you know, your mouth open, or mouth to the floor. I was quite surprised this St. Joseph's Day that I had to wait online at a pastry shop to get the zeppole di San Giuseppe. But I happily waited. I was very happy to be there. Ero molto contento di essere lì. Ero molto contento di essere lì. I was very happy to be there. I wanted my zeppole. So, while I was online, though, mentre ero in fila, or mentre stavo sulla coda, mentre ero in fila is what's coming to me. While I was online, mentre ero in fila, you know, if you've watched my videos, come to my group lessons, you have a good idea of how I just love absorbing culture. I am always occhi aperti, orecchie aperte, you know, eyes and ears open. I am eyes and ears open, taking everything in like a sponge. Because for me, everything is a, you know, sociological, anthropological, ethnographical study. Like everything is just a study. I'm just taking it all in. And as I'm there, I'm hearing the conversations people are saying online, how people are bumping into each other that maybe they haven't seen in a while, and their accent, like I'm taking it all in. And I loved even just hearing, I'll share with you, I won't give all the details because they were having a private conversation, but these two women in front of me, they saw each other. So the one woman was online in front of me, and I guess someone she knew walks in and sees her and goes, "Oh my God, hi." I'm going to imitate the accent a little bit. Gives her a big hug and kiss, and they start talking about their parents who recently passed away and where they were located in the cemetery. Now, if you're from the northeast of the US or any kind of Italian-American community, you'll be familiar with this kind of talk. I can't speak for any other kind of community that I haven't spent a great deal of time in, but I've spent a great deal of time in Italian-American circles in the northeast of the US, and so I'm very much well acquainted with this kind of talk. It's very normal to talk like this. So it's not viewed as morbid, okay? And they're saying, yeah, you know, my father, they put my father over here, so when you go inside, all right, you gotta turn here and you'll see my father's tombstone. So they're talking like that. And then they're talking about the zeppole, and when one of the women gets asked what they would like to order. She goes, yeah, I'd like to get the St. Joseph's pastries. And they say, which is the one with the cannoli cream? All right, give me 2 of those. And then they go back to talking. I just loved it. I just loved it because it reminds me of my childhood. It reminds me of these communities and how these communities, we sometimes think they don't exist anymore. A volte pensiamo che non esistono più. So sometimes we think they don't exist anymore. A volte pensiamo che non esistono più. But they do. They just exist in different ways. Esistono in modi diversi. And I spoke about this in a prior video. Ne ho parlato in un video precedente. So I spoke about this in a prior video. I'll link it down below. It's a video with the title like Why It Ain't Like It Used to Be. And basically in the past, these Italian-American communities, you were much more aware of them because people resided in certain places. They had these like festivals, let's say, all the time that brought people out. They had shops, restaurants. Like the community felt more presente, you know? Più attiva. But you know, I've been observing this over a long period of time just to sort of go down this road for a moment because it's something I see everywhere. And what I've started to understand is that this is not something just exclusive to an Italian-American community where people long for those days of what it was like, but this is across the board. And I think what I'm gathering is that people now have very, very full lives. People have much more opportunity. They have opportunity in all sense, not even just work opportunity, just opportunity to do things in life. And there are more distractions. Technology obviously plays a big role in this. People can feel satisfied socially in a lot of instances by what they're consuming digitally. And so that may lead them to not feel as strong of a desire to uscire da casa, to leave house, get out of the house, uscire da casa. And then it also has the opposite effect, l'effetto opposto, l'effetto contrario, the contrary or opposing effect, where they feel more lonely and so they seek out community and want to be in the presence of others physically. So you're going to find, as with everything, everyone on a different part of the spectrum, and the spectrum is extremely flexible, è molto flessibile. It's very flexible, so people are going to sort of go from one part of the spectrum to another in very little time. And so when I see these particular things, these moments, right? These eventi speciali, these special events, it brings the people out. You know, you may go, let's say for example, let's say you visit, you frequenti questo posto spesso. You frequent this place often. You go to it often. And maybe you never see these people there. You know, it could be your local pizzeria, your local Italian pastry shop, right? Local Italian bakery. And maybe you never see these people. But when it's la Festa di San Giuseppe, tutti escono fuori. When it's the Feast of St. Joseph's, everyone comes out, just as they come out for other things. And it goes to show you that these communities are not dead, because the way I interpret the word dead, morto, is that something ceases to exist. But then we have la sfumatura. Then we have the nuance. What does a community being dead actually mean? Someone may be referring to that as the community is not as it used to be. That's one way of describing the community as dead, right? It doesn't necessarily imply what I interpret that to mean. If a community is dead, I think è finito. You know, it's finished. Like, you're not going to find even people coming out on a special day. It's just gone and is a thing of the past. So that's how I interpret it. And so with that interpretation in mind, I would not say, secondo me questa comunità non può essere reputata morta. It can't be given this attribute of being dead. Non può essere reputata. Like, it can't have the reputation of being dead. Secondo me è sbagliato. In my opinion, that's a mistake. That's an error. It's wrong. Perché secondo me non è morto. Non è morta. In my opinion, it's not dead. It's just different. given some of these things that I mentioned, technology, just the way that time goes on. But there's more that I want to add to this. C'è di più. C'è di più. There's more I want to add to this. So, another thing happened. One time for Easter, I believe it was, una volta per Pasqua, and Pasqua is coming, quindi Pasqua sta arrivando. We can also say Pasqua sta avvicinando, or noi stiamo avvicinando a Pasqua. You know, we're kind of getting closer to Easter. I remember one time for Easter, I went to the Italian Mass. Now, in a lot of Italian communities, they have Mass, which is Catholic Mass, la Messa Cattolica, the Catholic Church service, for those, if you're not familiar with the term. I think most people are, but just in case you're not. The teacher in me always feels the need to explain. In a lot of Italian communities, you will find churches that do Mass in Italian. Now, some people may say, with this idea of a community being dead, they may think, well, is there a need for an Italian Mass anymore? People may understand the need for a Mass in Spanish. There are many Spanish-speaking communities that tend to be very Catholic, and so a Mass in Spanish seems to make a lot of sense. But why would a Mass still be offered in Italian? That may appear to someone as a holdover from the past, when all of the old Italians were still around, right? Believe it or not, I remember when I went to the Italian Mass on Easter, it was packed. And not only was it packed, there were families there. There were different generations of people there. It was not just an elderly Italian Mass. It was frequented by little kids with their parents. Some people were actual Italians, you know, of these younger generations, so not just descendants such as myself of Italians. And I was like, wow. And what was also beautiful about that is, you know, Catholicism, if you look into Catholicism, not only is it a religion, but it is also very cultural, which you could argue about all religions, honestly. But Catholicism is very much cultural, just as also being something of faith. And so what's interesting is, even when I tell people, you know, I was just at a store telling someone about Italy, and he was asking me, we got talking about where to visit, where to eat, and stuff like that. And so it was my first time shopping at this store, and you know how sometimes they take down your nome e cognome e indirizzo mail? So your name, last name, and email address. Nome, cognome, indirizzo mail. Indirizzo mail is a way of saying like email address. And so as we were talking about this, we're having this conversation, and then it's finally time to do the transaction. Effettuare il pagamento, we can also say, to process the payment. Effettuare il pagamento. That's a great expression. Effettuare il pagamento, to process payment. So we're at this point of processing payment, and we're talking about Italy, whatever. And when he sees my name, he goes, "Oh, so you're Italian?" And I was like, "Yeah." And it's always fun for me when I have that interaction too culturally, that in the US, you're called Italian. I'm American. I'm not Italian. I'm Italian-American, or I'm an American of Italian descent. I have Italian heritage. So for Italians in Italy, I can't tell them I'm Italian. I'm Americano. But for the Americans, I'm Italian because it's understood that I'm American. But people like to know about your ethnic background. And so even in those moments when someone knows you're Italian, they then assume you're Catholic. That's just out in society how it works. It's really no surprise. So being Catholic is also very much a cultural thing. And so being at an Italian Mass is a way of embracing not only the faith and why you're there for Easter and the purpose of that very important Christian holiday, but also the cultural side of it and the fact that it's in Italian, you know? It comes together, and then you see this community and you're like, wow, the community is not dead. And it's even cool to see the Italians that are here of the newer generation, the older Italians that have been here for such a long time, and then someone like me who's just taking it all in and loving it. So, this all has something to do with questo concetto, with this concept. And it's that the communities are not dead, it's just now they go to selective meeting places. Whether that is a punto d'incontro, we can call it. Un punto d'incontro is like a point of contact, a point of meeting, a meeting point. Un punto d'incontro. They're just going to these places. It's very much like the idea of a Comic-Con. You go to a Comic-Con and perhaps outside of Comic-Con, you may not be aware of that culture. But the moment you go, and I've been to Comic-Con before, and it's a wonderful experience. People are dressed up. People are taking photos, even of people they don't know. They're saying, hey, I want to take a picture. I love your costume. And there are all these booths, and people are signing autographs, and it's just, even people from TV shows of years past, it's so cool to be a part of this stuff. I love culture. Any kind of culture, I'm in, okay? I am all in. And so that is a culture. And so someone may think, oh, who goes to Comic-Con? I heard about that years ago. If you show up, you will see just how active that community is. And so that's how it is with Italian stuff as well. In the US, for example. And so there's another point I wanted to make about this, which ties in with this whole changing idea and identity, all of that. Adesso è figo essere italiano. Now it's cool to be Italian. Oggigiorno è figo essere italiano. Nowadays, oggigiorno, it's cool to be Italian. And this is an idea I've shared before. I talk about it all the time. I'm very interested in it. Mi interessa molto. I'm very interested in it. It interests me a lot. Mi interessa molto. When I was younger, I would observe a lot of people. Everyone always used for their grandparent like a nickname, right? Anything under the sun you could think of. So there's always some kind of nickname, a term of endearment rather, a term of endearment for a grandparent. But I have found particularly interesting how many people today are American-born, but they want to be called nonno and nonna when they become grandparents. And I think that's wonderful. And that is someone really kind of stepping into and leaning into this cultural identity, what it means for them to be a grandparent. You know, che cosa significa essere nonno o nonna? Che cosa significa? What does it mean? Because there was a moment in time, c'era un periodo di tempo in cui, there was a period of time in which, c'era un periodo di tempo in cui, molte persone non volevano essere chiamato neanche nonno o nonna, grandma or grandpa. There was a time in which some people, in my experience, in my circles, they didn't want to be called even grandma or grandpa because they said, I'm not a grandparent, I'm young. I'm not like my parents that were old at my age. That, first of all, is a really curious thing. Curious as in interesting, and mi incuriosisce molto. It interests me a lot. So first you had that, where people didn't want to be called grandma or grandpa because that word, portava con sé, brought along with it, portava con sé, a sense of age and being old, you know? And they didn't feel old. They were a young, hip, modern grandparent from the 21st century. So there was a time there where they didn't want to use the terms grandma and grandpa. And la fase di oggi, sort of the phase of today, you know, the trend, il trend di oggi, the trend of today, is now they want to lean into, some people, alcune persone, they want to lean into their cultural side, right? And be called nonno or nonna. So they're very happy to be called nonno or nonna, but they don't want to be grandma or grandpa. I think that's so cool. È affascinante. It's fascinating. È affascinante. And I think that's a beautiful thing too. It's an acknowledgement of wanting to kind of, you know, enter into this new way, if you will, you know, reclaiming something even too. It's beautiful. And you see this not even in an Italian-American circle. Obviously, as I said earlier, I spend the most time in these circles, but I've seen it in other circles as well. I even just saw recently, not too long ago, the Canadian government made it so that people could get Canadian citizenship by descent. I think didn't matter. There's no more a generational limit, so it doesn't matter how far back you go. And even in that, when I was watching the videos of people talking about it, they say the same things verbatim that you'll hear Italian Americans or people of Italian descent talking about with their connection to Italy, their connection to their ancestors, and this idea of Italian citizenship, which has been a huge topic in Italian circles in recent years and even in recent days. So this is something that is universal. I even remember one time seeing a video of the popular American TV host, late night talk show host Conan O'Brien. I think he had gone to Ireland one time and they were filming him, and he spoke about his connection to Ireland and his Irish heritage, and he made certain comments talking about even his feelings of what people looked like or how they resembled him and what it made him feel. It's all the same. Anyone who enters into this realm of talking about their cultural heritage and the connection and places of origin, it's all connected. People have been writing about it for a long time. I just heard about a book, I think, called The Imagined Homeland or something, which talks about the stories and some mysticism or myths, if you will. It's a whole area of study. I still have to get into it more, but I'm getting closer to digging in even more into it. But I'm kind of on the surface right now. So what does all this have to talk about? And what was that point I was making with "è figo essere italiano adesso"? In the past, many people wouldn't, and obviously we can't speak for everyone, but the notion of what I have experienced and even heard, you didn't really want to associate with being other. There was this idea of not celebrating a difference and wanting to be more a part of the community, to be accepted, to not be looked at as less than, because usually when one is othered in society, they tend to be marginalizzato, so sort of cast aside and othered and viewed less than. And nobody wants that. You want to be a full-fledged membro della comunità. You want to be a full-fledged member of the community. So all of it is understood. You know, anytime we touch on these topics of the past, I feel it's always necessary to treat it delicately and also to put it in its cultural and temporal framework, its historical framework. Where was it at that context in time? Because hindsight is always 20/20, and we can always say something was wrong or something should have been. And whether or not that's true or false is not really the point. It's more just accepting history for what it was, analyzing it. There's nothing wrong with bringing it into the present to try to be more scrupulous, if you will, to sort of decide how we feel it should have been. But we also have to just honor it for what it was. La storia è la storia. We should just sort of observe it. It's there. Okay. And if you want to make changes, then the further you go into the future, you can do so. So the point is, it wasn't very cool to be Italian. You didn't really want to identify as that. You wanted to speak English, right? Volevi parlare inglese. You wanted to be a full-fledged member of the community. But now it's so nice to see people really embracing this side and even wanting to lean into it. And that's been my experience. Questa è stata anche la mia esperienza con molti miei studenti. With many of my students, they want to learn Italian now because they didn't get the chance to hear it from their family members, because they didn't want to share that. They wanted their children and grandchildren to be Americans, But now, how beautiful that you can be both, Or you can still be fully American, but embrace that side, Especially when those family members aren't here anymore, quando non ci sono più, or quando mancano. We can use the verb mancare to say when they're missing, when they're lacking, when they've passed away. È mancato qualcuno means someone passed away. È mancato qualcuno. So, yeah, that is basically it. So, it's a huge topic, come ogni cosa, è un grande argomento. It's a huge topic. Però mi piace molto passare tempo a pensare a queste cose. So I love spending time to think about these things and to share it with all of you. I know it resonates with so many of you, and that's why I enjoy sharing. Quindi è per questo motivo che mi piace condividere, perché so che risuona tanto anche con tanti di voi. I know it resonates a lot, risuona with so many of you. So please feel free to share with me your experiences. We talk about this all the time in my group lessons. If you'd ever like to learn more or attend one of my group lessons, check out the link in the top line of the description. You'd think I say it all the time. I'd know how to say it a questo punto at this point, but doesn't always work that way. Okay, guys, always remember to spread the love. E ci vediamo alla prossima, va bene? Ok, ragazzi. Ciao. Ciao.